What's good people, and welcome to the Silly, Nerdy, Sometimes Wordy podcast. I'm your host, BK, and this is episode 5, the NFL offseason, a focus on the NFL draft process. Hope everybody's doing well out there this week. Just want to give another big thank you to all the listeners that are still with me. I appreciate you. Hope you keep listening. Hope you're liking the content I'm putting out. All right. This week, we're focusing on the NFL draft process. And what we're going to go over today is we're going to talk about a couple of things of newsworthy notes from the NFL owners meetings that took place this past week. And we're going to talk about some things from there. Then we'll get right into the NFL draft process, from players declaring for the NFL draft all the way up to the NFL draft itself, which takes place on Thursday, April 27th to Saturday, April 29th. And lastly, we'll talk about the takeaways from this podcast. Let's get into it. The NFL owners meetings. We're going to talk about a few things, few newsworthy things. And the NFL owners meetings is something that takes place every year on the NFL calendar. Normally takes place in late March and normally in a warm weather state. This year it was Arizona. Some things I want to highlight that was either voted on and approved, discussed, and are tabled for next year. Starting off, something that is very visible that everybody will be able to see is that it was voted on and approved that players will be allowed to wear the jersey number of 0 on their jerseys. All players and all positions, with the exception of defensive linemen and offensive linemen, they will not be able to wear the number 0. They'll have to be double digits in the high numbers. This also will include kickers and punters. If they so choose, they can wear the number 0 as well. And one player has already posted on social media that he will be wearing the number 0. And that is wide receiver Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He will be wearing the number 0. And if you remember Calvin Ridley, he did not play last season because he was suspended for gambling while he was still with his initial team, the Atlanta Falcons. He was suspended for all of last season, and he was then traded months later to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He has been reinstated, and he will be on the field this upcoming season for Trevor Lawrence and that Jacksonville Jaguars offense. Okay, so that's one thing you'll be able to see visibly from this owners meeting. Another thing that was agreed upon, is teams will now be able to play up to 2 Thursday night games during the NFL season. So that is an option for teams to do. Also, with Thursday night games, it was discussed but not agreed upon, be tabled, is that the discussion of having possibly Sunday afternoon games flexed into Thursday night. And when I say flex, that means a game that happens on Sunday would be possibly moved up into the Thursday night game. Almost like exactly like what happens with Sunday afternoon games going to Sunday night. A lot of times you see a game that was scheduled to be on Sunday Night Football gets moved out because a game that is going to be happening on Sunday afternoon gets flexed and moved into Sunday Night Football. So they're trying to do the same thing with Thursday night, of course, with the exception of it being the Sundays are within the same day, goes from the afternoon to night, whereas they're trying to move a game that's happening on Sunday afternoon a couple days earlier into Thursday night. There was some pushback from the players, recovery time and everything. So amongst other disagreements, we'll see if that gets approved in later years. Another thing from the NFL owners meetings is the Washington Commanders. They are reportedly for sale, and the asking price is reportedly $6 billion. Initially, the team was bought by owner Dan Snyder for, at the time, $750 million, which was a lot at the time. But now the team is worth, I guess, $6 billion. There are two ownership groups that have been identified, and they have put their bids in, but no decision, and there's no vote that has been made yet. So we'll see how that goes. At the same time, the Washington Commanders are under investigations for allegations that I will not get into, but you are so welcome to go and look the details up for yourself to see what that's about. And that's all I'll say. So that's news on the Washington Commanders. The last thing from the NFL owners meetings that I'll highlight is that the owners voted no to have the roughing the passer penalty as a reviewable play. So that will not be reviewable. It will not be challengeable by a coach's challenge. That is items from the NFL owners meetings that took place in Arizona. Now we get into the NFL draft process. I wanted to talk about this because all the casual folks, you just see and hear their name called and walk across the stage or at their homes at the viewing parties and whatnot. Or if you're a nerd like me, you see some of the combines and the pro days. But I wanted to talk about this process because there's a lot that happens between their name getting called and before their name gets called on draft night, draft day. The first thing that happens is that players have to declare for the NFL draft, and there's paperwork involved that they have to submit to the league office, whether that's the player in themselves or most likely their representative/agent. So they have to declare for that, and that can happen as early as the middle or late college football season, or right before a college bowl game or the college football playoff, or sometimes they'll play a couple games and decide, hey, I'm just going to focus on the draft. And then also every prospects, when I say prospects, I'm talking about the college football players. Every prospects player is their situation is different. Whether there's an injury involved or maybe they need to rehab, so they'll use that extra time to rehab and start the preparation process, getting an agent and going through the process and seeing all of that. So they have to declare and kind of start the process. The next thing that happens, a part of the evaluation process, is the Senior Bowl game / Senior Bowl week. This takes place late January to early February. And normally this is in Alabama in the United States. This is where senior prospects and some early graduating juniors from schools all across the country compete in a week's worth of practices leading up to the Senior Bowl game. And this is where some of the head coaches and positional coaches and GMs and other executives get a chance to see them in person during the week as well as the game. And so they go through that and they kind of, continue on with the evaluation process. Of course, there's a note I want to put in here that this evaluation process is not just starting at this Senior Bowl week game, but it's happening all year round because NFL scouts are on the road at these college football games and practices all college football season long, attending the games, attending the practices. So not only, they're doing this Senior Bowl week and other stuff that I'm going to mention, but NFL scouts are on the road looking at them in person, as well as their tape from other schools that maybe they can't get to. So that is a very, very important thing. So NFL scouting department for all teams, big shout out to you guys being on the road all the time. The next thing that happens that I want to bring attention to also, and that is relatively new. When I say new, meaning it's only in its second year of existence, that is the Legacy Bowl and the HBCU Combine. HBCU meaning historically black college universities. I wanted to bring attention to this because we're going to talk about the NFL Combine later, and not a lot of players from these HBCUs get invited to the NFL Combine. And 2022 is the first time where they're going to have this. They've had this Legacy Bowl game, where it's the same thing as the Senior Bowl, where they'll have a week's worth of practices and then they'll have the game itself. But this is focused on historically black colleges, universities. So it's a chance for the players from these schools to get on the radar of these NFL teams and executives and owners, so that they can hopefully hear their name called and get drafted. So that's what happens with the Legacy Bowl week and game. Of course, before the game takes place, there is the combine, the HBCU combine. So they're doing pretty much almost the same things they're doing at the NFL combine in terms of testing, seeing how many, what's their bench press, their hand size, their weight. They're doing 40 times, positional drills. They're meeting with teams and talking with them, getting that one-on-one time. They're, getting all this information because these players aren't getting the opportunity to come to the NFL draft from these smaller schools, these HBCU schools. So that happens there. And so I just wanted to bring attention from those schools like the school I went to, players from North Carolina Central University or A&T University or Jackson State or just different South Carolina State. It's different, just different HBCUs or Bethune-Cookman. I just want to shout them out, but different HBCUs from the players from these schools that can get a chance to get drafted in the league and make a name for themselves and, achieve their dream. Moving on to the NFL Combine, as I foreshadowed a little earlier, this is where the NFL world descends on Indianapolis, and that is where it's been happening for a long time. The NFL Combine takes place a couple weeks after the Super Bowl is over with. So this is the NFL machine kind of moving on. Yes, we just played the Super Bowl, but now we got to focus on this new crop of players coming into the league. So this is where we have the tests happens. Again, they're doing the same thing, positional drills, testing, weighing, measuring hand size. They're doing interviews. The players are meeting with the teams. They also used to have this thing called the Wonderlic test. I don't think it's something that happens anymore, but it's a thing where they would have players do these questions and ask these questions in terms of weird, unique things to kind of get some particular information. Like if you were an animal, what would that animal be and why? And they would gain some type of information from them. Just weird, unique questions that sometimes had nothing to do with football whatsoever, but they would get some type of information based on the answer that the players chose. I don't think this is a thing that happens anymore, but it was always fun when the insiders somehow got the answers to these questions for players. And it was just funny how the questions were unique and the answers. So that's the NFL Combine. So each of this happens over 3 to 4 days, where they have different days dedicated to different positions. For instance, they would have the cornerbacks, safeties, and cornerbacks and safeties, and maybe another position. They'll go on one day. So they'll do their 40 time and positional drills one day. Then they'll have the linebackers and defensive linemen. They'll do in one day. And then the offensive linemen and running back will go on one day. And then the quarterbacks and wide receivers and tight ends, they'll go on one day. And they'll kind of have that each day is dedicated towards different position groups. And that all happens in Indianapolis, as well as those prospects will get a chance to talk to the media a little bit as well as well as the coaches will be able to talk to media while they're there. That is the NFL Combine. Again, another thing in the evaluation process, another step in the evaluation process of these NFL prospects that will eventually be drafted in the NFL draft. We move on to the NFL, the pro days. The pro days are a localized version of the NFL Combine. So instead of the NFL world descending on one location in Indianapolis, they have to fly and or drive to the different schools across the country to see these players. And in a lot of instances, the players will not participate in the combine, or they will only do certain things. Maybe they'll just do the interviews and the media portion. They won't do any physical things because maybe they have an injury, maybe they're rehabbing, and they need that extra time to heal, and they'll do the testing and the positional drills at their combine. For instance, you'll have to go to different schools, whether it's University of Tennessee, University of Ohio State, or Alabama, or North Carolina, or Kentucky. Wherever the players are, that's where the NFL personnel will have to go to get those players tested. And this is normally happening 1 to 2 weeks after the combine, 1 to 2 weeks after the combine. And they can be within back-to-back days. And not every team is going to send everybody. Like, the owner is not going to go to every pro day, or the coaches is not going to go to every pro day. So sometimes they'll send everybody there, depending on, especially if it's a quarterback and you're in the top picks, or they'll send a few people or a scout, or sometimes they won't even send anybody at all at these pro days. But for instance, let's focus on the top 4 projected quarterbacks to go in this year's 2023 NFL draft. They were all back-to-back days and a week within each other. Just to give you an example, for instance, the top 4 quarterbacks. On Wednesday, March 22nd, Ohio State's C.J. Stroud, he had his pro day. And then March 23rd, Bryce Young from the University of Alabama, he had his pro day. Then Friday, March 24th, University of Kentucky's quarterback Will Levis had his pro day. Then the following week, March 30th, University of Florida's quarterback Anthony Richardson had his pro day. So you see what I'm talking about. So especially if you're a team in the top 5, for instance, Carolina Panthers, your Indianapolis Colts, those 2 of the teams are in the top 5 that will be most likely they will be selecting quarterbacks, have to go and see them in person. And so they're having all the testing done, the same as the combine, the 40 times, their weights and positional drills. So this is a chance for the players to kind of put their best foot forward. They're comfortable. They're in their home school. They're with their teammates and coaches. And also, particularly for the quarterbacks and other positions, not only is a chance for those quarterbacks that I mentioned, for them to shine, but also their teammates that are also draft eligible. There's a chance for them to get noticed as well. Because sometimes a coach is there to pay attention to this one particular player, but then they see this other player, like, who is that guy? This guy is amazing. And they weren't there to see this guy, but now this guy is on their radar. And so now they're going to go back and look at this tight ends tape, or look at this running backs tape, or receivers tape, or this defensive players tape that they were not going there to see this defensive player, but they noticed him. So this is a chance for them to get noticed as well. Also, it is a chance for players that are not draft eligible for the current year, but maybe they will be in the following year's draft, and that's a way for them to get on their radar. I was like, oh, we'll keep an eye out for this wide receiver next year. So that's a chance for them as well. So that's another advantage of having these pro days in this evaluation process. Moving on, the next thing, and one of the last things in this evaluation process, is the private workouts slash team visits. This is where the players and or their representatives slash agents will arrange, schedule a visit with the team themselves for the player to go out to the team facility to have a private workout and meeting and dinners. And this is private. So this is the only way to where there are no cameras involved, so no media involved. The only media interaction I would say is that the insiders will get the dates and the teams that these players are visiting, but there are no cameras involved. So you're not going to see any films of these workouts or these interviews. So this is just another chance for the players and the coaches and the GMs and the owners to get to know the player, to have a meeting with them, dinner with them, to just get to know them, not only what they can do on the field, but what they can do and what the type of person they are off the field, and what, who they come from, what's about their family, to, take another deeper look into their character, into their background, and what type of person they're going to be off the field and representing the team, especially if you're going to be the quarterback, as they say, the face of the franchise. So you're going to be representing that team. So the owner wants to know, the GM wants to know, how is he going to handle, these types of things, what type of leader he is, what type of person he is, and they want a chance to meet their family, whether it's, their wife or their girlfriend or their mom or guardian, whoever it is, a brother or sister, or their, daughter, kids. So that's just a chance to get to know them, for them to make a more informed decision once this draft happens. So that is private workouts and teams for them to make their decision before they start to make picks on April 27th. Okay, now we move to the NFL draft, which again takes place this year, Thursday night, April 27th. to Saturday, April 29th. Now, for a long time, the draft used to take place on Saturday and Sunday, and it would start at 12 p.m. on Saturday. And also, it would be held in one primary location for a long, long time in New York City at Radio City Music Hall. And that's where it was held, and it was just there for a long time. But then a couple years ago, I think maybe it's coming up on almost 10 years or so, that the NFL Players Association, they decided to change things up, not only moving from Saturday and Sunday, but moving it from Thursday to Saturday, and also changing the location to having it be in different NFL cities every year. For instance, the next 2 years, this year, later this month, the draft will be in Kansas City. And then in 2024, the draft is going to be in Detroit, Michigan, home of the Detroit Lions. Previous years, it's been in Tennessee, home of the Tennessee Titans. 1 year is in Chicago, home of the Chicago Bears, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is something they decided to do, to just kind of it's also an opportunity to give fans to experience the NFL as well. So every year it's just going to be in a different city as opposed to being in one primary location. I think it's worked out pretty well also. So that's just a little bit of history of the location and the timing of the NFL draft, as well as them moving it to prime time to get, more coverage of the NFL. And so I mentioned that this year it will be in Kansas City, home of the Kansas City Chiefs. And now let's talk about those prospects. So the NFL sends out invites for the players to come to the draft. And they send out a good amount of invites, but not every player gets invited. And at the same time, in many instances, the players will a lot of times, decline the invites sometimes, because they want to be around their family and friends, their loved ones. So that's where you see all the viewing parties, or they're at their house on a couch or some venue. And sometimes you see some funny things on there, especially because they have the camera set up there. So if they decide to decline, or the NFL will send cameras to set up at their home or at the venue, so they can have that reaction during the draft live as it happens. And sometimes they will send reporters there to get a interview right after the player their name is called, the draft happens. So that's part of it. And there's one little story I want to tell where a player he didn't go to the draft. He wasn't at home on the couch with his family. This guy was on a boat fishing with his family. I don't know if it was father or something, but offensive lineman prospect at the time, Joe Thomas. So what he did was he decided, I'm going to go fishing while this draft is happening with some family. And so that's what he did. So he had a sat phone, communication device. So he got the call. The call came in, and he got drafted to the Cleveland Browns. And he talked to the coach and possibly the owner and whoever else. And then that was that. They got it on camera, by the way. And then he just went back to fishing. And lo and behold, that offensive lineman is now going into the Hall of Fame this coming August. So that's just, you don't have to be at the draft to get drafted, and you still be great. And so he decided I'm just going to go fishing, during the draft. So it worked out pretty well for him. I thought that was pretty cool, and the fact that he's going into the Hall of Fame. He was a great offensive lineman, great All-Pro. So that's the NFL draft, and so you get drafted, your name gets called, the draft is over. Now the work starts to begin. Of course, now you negotiate your contract with your agent or representative, but nowadays there's not a lot of negotiation because the different positions, everything is slotted now, where back in the day used to be a lot of holdouts and whatnot. So eventually your contract gets signed a lot earlier. It's just language and the arrangement of money and how it gets paid out. But you get drafted, contract is signed, and then you get your playbook, and then you report to the team, your team's facility, at a designated date and time in terms of when you can get there and start getting used to everything, and start working out and getting into the playbook and plays and getting used to coaches and whatnot, and your positional coaches. And so now the work begins, and you work your way towards, OTAs, organized team activities, mini camps, and eventually training camp that happens in mid-July to August. And then, of course, week one comes, provided that you make the roster, you're on the active roster. And then week one comes, and you're on the field playing. And hopefully you have a long and successful career and get that second contract. But that is the NFL draft process. Okay. My takeaway from this episode 5 of the podcast. The takeaway is I wanted to shine a light on these college athletes and all the things they have to do before they have their name called. You could also say that this is a job interview, what they're doing. And you could say that the resume is their film, their game film, what they have put on tape. And then you would say the second and third multiple interviews, callbacks, is the different stages and workouts, whether it's the combine, the Senior Bowl week, the Legacy Combine, the Legacy Bowl game, and then you have your private workouts, team visits, your dinners and meetings, talking with owners, the head coach, positional coaches, especially the position that you're going to be in. You're going to have a good rapport with him or her, and as well as the owner. So that is important. So they're doing all these things before they get their name call, whether they're rehabbing their injury, they're training, maybe they're trying to gain some weight, lose a little bit of weight, change some mechanics in their footwork, depending on the position that you're in, whether you're, changing position with the quarterback, starting to, get used to reading NFL defenses and offenses and breaking them down. So these are the things that these college players, these 21-year-olds, 23-year-olds have to go through before they get their name called. Also, what they have to do is to stay out of trouble. Do not do anything to get yourself in trouble with the law. Don't jeopardize millions and millions of dollars before you get drafted. And unfortunately, things do happen, whether something that's happened in the past that all of a sudden pops up. So you could go from being a top 5, top 10, top 20 draft pick in the first round, and then you can go all the way down to the 4th, 5th, or maybe not being drafted at all. And so the amount of money from round 1 to round 4, let's say, or round 5, is very significant. So every time I unfortunately see someone get in trouble with the law or be accused of something, I just shake my head. I'm like, what are you doing? Like you're taking away money from yourself, from your family, especially you're trying to get out of a bad situation, or get out of where you're living and take your mom and all the things that she's dedicated, and you kind of jeopardize that. So I always hate to see that, but unfortunately, life happens. So that is the NFL draft process, and that is my takeaway. So these young men have to do a lot of things before they get drafted. And yeah, that's all. Just want to say thanks for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe, leave a comment, give us a rating, and follow the podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Audible. Please check us out. Share this podcast with your friends and family, and hopefully they'll give us a listen. And that's all I have. So until next time, we'll talk soon.